The first sneeze echoed through the sterile white chamber like a plasma rifle misfiring. Soren Ellis blinked rapidly and reached into his pocket for a tissue. He didn't find one. Standard Earth tissues had been banned aboard the medical cruiser Valaric due to an incident involving cellulose and a species with cellulose-based skin. He wiped his nose awkwardly on his sleeve and sniffled. "You are contaminated," said Drayle, the lead xenopathologist, eyes narrowing as its pupils rotated independently. The nasal expulsion was violent, possibly contagious, possibly terminal. Soren sniffed again, louder this time, and tilted his head toward the towering alien. "It's hay fever." Drayle adjusted its translator note. "Fever from hay. Please define. Not an actual fever. It's an allergy. Pollen. Trees. Grass. My immune system just overreacts." The alien's limbs tensed. "Your immune system attacks you?" "It thinks it's helping," Soren said, pulling another sneeze from deep within his sinuses. "Look, it's annoying, but it's not a disease." Drayle turned to the other medical personnel, all buzzing in a low, ultrasonic frequency that Soren had learned meant concern. Or possibly disgust. He'd been aboard for 3 days, undergoing a routine health screening before being allowed to negotiate trade agreements with the Wexari Confederation. So far, he'd been poked, scanned, and questioned more thoroughly than a suspect in an old Earth crime show. Drayle turned back. "You will be quarantined. Immediately." "Wait, what? This is really common. Millions of people have allergies." Drayle motioned, and 2 blue-shelled attendants stepped forward with a containment pod. Soren stepped back. "This is a misunderstanding. I just need antihistamines. You've got a full biosynthesis lab on deck, right? I can give you the chemical structure." Drayle's voice buzzed louder. "You are unstable. Your immune system is battling imaginary threats. This condition could mutate. Spread. We must protect the crew." "Mutate? It's not a virus." But Soren was already being guided firmly into the pod. The next 4 hours were spent in a translucent enclosure not much larger than a walk-in closet. The walls glowed with a muted lavender hue, which was apparently calming to Wexari eyes. Soren couldn't tell. His own eyes were watering too much. He sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, as a robotic arm sprayed him with a disinfectant mist every 20 minutes. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, rubbing at his nose. The wall shimmered and opened a tiny viewport. Drayle peered in. "We have analyzed your previous medical history from EarthNet. This hay fever is chronic." "Yeah," Soren coughed. "Since I was 8. Pollen season hits, and I get sneezy. That's it. Yet you function in society despite your immune system's betrayal?" "Millions of people do," Soren said. "We even have big festivals during spring. Flowers everywhere. It's not considered a disability. Just annoying." Drayle made a sound like a chirping kettle. "You expose yourselves to the source of your suffering deliberately? It's kind of beautiful." Drayle stared for a long moment. "That is illogical." Soren tried to shrug, but the enclosure made it awkward. "We do a lot of illogical things, I guess." The viewport closed. Soren sighed and leaned back against the smooth wall, wondering if he'd be stuck here until the ship docked again. He needed to be in the negotiation chamber in less than 2 days. Earth's bid for trade with the Wexari Confederation hinged on this mission. 6 hours later, a different alien entered the medbay. Tall, with glistening copper-colored skin and wide, vertical eyes, the newcomer introduced himself as Savrex, an immunopsychologist. "I examined the interface between biological defense systems and mental function," Savrex explained, placing a small cube on the floor of Soren's enclosure. "You appear to be unbothered by the internal war your immune system wages." "I'm mildly irritated," Soren said, voice muffled through another tissue made from recycled protein mesh. "But yeah, not scared." Savrex tapped the cube. A projection of Earth's immune anatomy spun into the air. "You have leukocytes that misidentify proteins as threats, and yet you continue to exist in contaminated environments." Soren nodded. "Because we can't always control what's in the air. This suggests a remarkable tolerance for suffering." "It's not suffering," Soren said slowly. "It's just life. You manage it. You adapt." Savrex leaned closer. "Your people willingly cohabitate with pathogens and allergens. That is resilience. Or madness." Soren chuckled, then sneezed. "Probably both." By the next morning, the alien crew had escalated the issue to the Diplomatic Council. A full emergency session was convened aboard the Valaric. Soren, still in quarantine, watched through a holographic feed as various officials debated whether to cancel Earth's trade application due to biological instability. One delegate, a feathery creature named Velan, proposed that humans might be harboring undetected pathogens masked as allergies. "I've been tested," Soren said into the feed. "Like 15 times. Velan fluffed. "And yet you continue to secrete fluids from facial orifices. It's mucus. It's not contagious." Drail stepped forward. "We must consider the possibility that this is a biological defense mechanism. Perhaps even a weapon. The human's body produces an overflow of histamines in response to harmless stimuli. What if this response can be manipulated?" "It can," Soren said. "That's what antihistamines are for." A pause. Then a dozen alien heads turned toward Drail. "He speaks of chemical immunosuppression." "Yes," Soren said. "That's how we handle it. Pills, sprays. You've got a whole synthesis lab on board. I can show you." Drail hesitated. "There is risk. You've been poking me with scanners all week." "What's the risk in making a nasal spray?" 2 hours later, Soren stood in the lab still under armed supervision as he guided Savrex and Drail through the process of synthesizing loratadine. The alien equivalent of a pharmacist, a silent green-eyed being named Vetra, handled the mixing. When the solution was ready, Soren administered a measured dose. Within 15 minutes, the sneezing stopped. He stood still, then waved at the aliens. "See? Nothing dangerous. Just allergies." Drail tapped its note screen. "So this affliction is not transmissible, not mutagenic, not fatal." "Nope. And yet you endure it annually." "Yeah," Soren said. "But we get cherry blossoms, and fresh-cut grass, and spring picnics. You take the bad with the good." Drail looked baffled. Savrex stared at the antihistamine like it was a holy relic. "You willingly endure seasonal autoimmune attacks for the sake of aesthetics?" Soren smiled. "That's humanity for you." After another 20 hours of observation and tests to confirm the medication's effects, Soren was officially released from quarantine. The diplomatic council reconvened, and with reluctantly amused expressions, the Wexari Confederation approved Earth's trade bid. As Soren walked through the docking bay toward the shuttle back to the embassy station, Savrex caught up with him. "Your resilience is worthy of study." Soren adjusted his collar. "I'm not special. I had to miss soccer tryouts 3 years in a row because of allergies." Savrex tilted its head. "And yet you do not fear the condition." "I fear not having tissues," Soren said, patting his pocket. "That's different." As the shuttle doors closed behind him, Drail stood watching. "Hay fever," it muttered. "What absurd creatures they are." 3 days after the sneeze scandal, Soren Ellis sat cross-legged in a translucent chair that adjusted to his weight like a patient but slightly confused jellyfish. The Wexari had assigned him quarters aboard the Valaric until the trade agreements were finalized. Though quarters might have been generous, the room had no bed, no door, and no walls in the human sense. Instead, gravity fields created privacy zones with shimmering blue borders and ambient sound bubbles. Soren had walked into one earlier and nearly dislocated a shoulder trying to lean on a wall that wasn't there. "Please do not attempt to rest against the privacy fields," came the room's monitoring unit, a voice that sounded eerily like a disappointed librarian. "I wasn't," said Soren, rubbing his elbow. "I was testing the tensile strength. For science." No reply. The room apparently knew when it was being lied to. At precisely midday ship time, a soft chime echoed through the space. Soren stood up, adjusted his jacket, and followed the directional arrows beamed onto the floor. They shifted like shoals of digital fish, guiding him toward the environmental simulation deck. No one had told him why. When he arrived, Drail was standing beside a rectangular chamber filled with what looked like purple foam. Beside him, Savrex tapped at a translucent console, while a cluster of other Wexari observed from behind a curved partition. They all wore environmental filtration masks, not because of Soren's presence, but because the foam chamber was releasing faint biogases used to simulate planetary atmospheres. "I'm not getting in that, am I?" Soren asked. Drail ignored the question. "You will be exposed to a controlled environment replicating the atmospheric composition of Trelvora Prime. We must assess your biological compatibility." "I thought we were past the whole fragile meat creature phase." "This is not about fragility," Savrex said without looking up. "It is about adaptability. You want to see if I can breathe alien air?" "Yes." "What happens if I can't?" You will lose consciousness, Drail said flatly. We will revive you. Soren stared at the purple foam. You people really know how to make a guy feel safe. You may refuse, Drail said, though it sounded more like a dare than a courtesy. Soren exhaled and stepped forward. Fine. But if I pass out, I'm making you buy me lunch. We do not eat solids. Then a drink. Something fermented. Drail nodded. Accepted. The chamber hissed open. Soren stepped inside, and the foam adjusted to his height, rising and falling in slow waves. The door sealed behind him with a soft pneumatic sigh. Within seconds, his throat began to itch. Not like pollen this time, this was sharper, like breathing in chalk dust. He coughed once, then again. The foam changed color, deepening to a reddish hue. Any reason the air tastes like burnt shrimp, he said aloud. The room didn't answer. Instead, the lights dimmed, and the pressure changed slightly, as if someone had turned up gravity just enough to make walking a chore. Soren clenched his jaw, breathed slowly through his mouth, and forced himself to stay upright. Outside, Savrex took notes. Heart rate elevated. Oxygen saturation declining, but within tolerable range. He is adjusting, Drail said, almost disappointed. Of course I'm adjusting, Soren muttered. You think New Jersey in August is pleasant? This smells like a seafood truck exploded in a sauna. Continue exposure for 3 more minutes, Savrex said. Soren's skin prickled. He wiped at his brow and realized he was sweating more than he should have been. His vision blurred slightly at the edges. He crouched, not out of exhaustion but to conserve energy. What exactly is the point of this? To determine if your species can tolerate minor atmospheric deviations without technological aid. Soren squinted toward the ceiling. We have entire cities full of smog. People jog in them. The foam shimmered and turned back to purple. A soft chime sounded, and the chamber opened. Soren stumbled out, eyes watering, chest heaving. Drail handed him a towel made of some kind of plant fiber that smelled faintly of cinnamon. You endured longer than predicted, Savrex said, tilting its head. Yeah, well, Soren said between gulps of filtered air, we've got this thing called survival instinct. Kicks in just before the blackout. Drail tapped a note into his tablet. You may be compatible with low oxygen environments. Neat, Soren said, toweling off. Let me know when you want me to try lava. That evening, during the diplomatic reception, Soren was seated at a circular table beside a gelatinous ambassador from the Flun conglomerate, who communicated via pulses of bioluminescence. A translation drone floated between them, cheerfully converting blobs of light into words. They say your internal organs are unshielded, the drone chirped. They find this both horrifying and admirable. Soren raised his glass of fermented root extract somewhat like kombucha, if kombucha had been brewed in a vat of electrical tape. Tell them we keep them inside for a reason. The ambassador pulsed a series of bright green flashes. The drone translated. They think that is very optimistic of you. Across the room, Drail and Savrex observed from a raised platform. A new Wexari joined them, taller than the others, with silver banding across its exosuit. This was Velen, chief negotiator and head of the diplomatic council. He should not be alive, Velen said without preamble. Drail nodded. And yet he is. His physiology is a patchwork of inefficiencies. His immune system attacks itself. He can survive toxic air. He consumes fermented sugars. His kind values endurance over optimization, Savrex said. Even their social rituals involve biological risk, Drail added. I have watched footage of their karaoke. Velen leaned forward. Are they dangerous? Only to themselves. Back at the table, Soren was engaged in a heated debate with a four-eyed delegate about the concept of gut health. No, I'm serious, he said, waving his fork for emphasis. We have trillions of microbes living in our intestines. They help digest food. The delegate recoiled, eyes blinking asynchronously. That is unsanitary. It's symbiotic. We feed them. They keep us healthy. Some people even take pills with extra bacteria. The alien made a noise like a clogged sink. You ingest foreign organisms voluntarily? Probiotics, Soren said. Great for digestion. A silence fell over the table as the delegates processed this new horror. Later that night, as ship lights dimmed to simulate a sleep cycle, Soren sat at the edge of his knot bed, watching the privacy fields ripple. A chime sounded. Savrex entered without waiting. Your species was not expected to pass the Trelvora trial, he said. Sorry to disappoint. It was not disappointment. It was recalibration. We are beginning to understand. Understand what? Savrex sat, folding its limbs in a way that suggested discomfort with stillness. You do not survive despite your biology. You survive because you do not see it as a limitation. Soren tilted his head. That's not philosophy. That's just how we're built. Savrex paused. You are not optimized. You are not efficient. But you are relentless. Some of us more than others. The alien rose. Your trade proposal will be accepted, not because of your resources, because of your nature. Soren stood. Just to be clear, are you saying Earth got a galactic trade deal because I didn't die in a foam box? Savrex considered. Precisely. Well, Soren said, grinning. Next time you want someone to pass out in alien air, maybe ask a Canadian. They're way more polite about it. Savrex nodded once, then departed. Alone again, Soren lay back in the gravity-adjusted chair, staring at the invisible ceiling. Outside, the Valaric drifted silently through starlit corridors of space, now carrying one more ambassador than it had expected and a whole new idea of what human durability really meant. By the fifth rotation aboard the Valaric, Soren Ellis had stopped trying to understand the ship's schedule and simply followed the ambient lighting changes like a migrating bird. He stood now in a chamber labeled Cognitive Exchange Lounge, which looked suspiciously like a library, if libraries had floating discussion pits and walls that shifted texture based on the tone of conversation. Soren's section felt like wool. Across from him, a being with a torso like a polished obsidian bell and limbs like bundled reeds manipulated a series of suspended glyphs mid-air. You do not retain data in external implants, it observed, not looking up. We use books, Soren said, flipping the pages of the one he'd brought as a gift. And digital storage. But most of our long-term memory still stays up here. He tapped his temple. The alien blinked vertically, which was new. You store essential knowledge in moist organic tissue prone to trauma, aging, and emotional distortion? Pretty much. And you consider this reliable. It's not perfect, Soren said, but we've built cultures on it. We even have a word for remembering things wrong. Nostalgia. The alien's limbs twisted. Your civilization functions on faulty recollection? We also have archives and hard drives. But yeah, a lot of our daily decisions are based on gut feelings and incomplete memories. The alien emitted a sound like a dropped tuning fork. Terrifying. Soren grinned. You get used to it. Later that cycle, Soren was summoned to the ship's biomechanical lab. He was escorted by a silent, quadrupedal being whose body glowed faintly with bioelectric pulses. It led him through a corridor lined with fluid tubes where plant-based organisms swayed in nutrient baths. Inside, Savrex stood beside a diagnostic column. A second Wexari, taller and more iridescent than any Soren had seen, adjusted a narrow beam instrument that emitted low-frequency vibrations. This is Mirov, Savrex said without preamble. They specialize in cross-species trauma recovery. Am I traumatized now? Soren asked. Not yet, Mirov said. We are investigating stress adaptation thresholds. I thought I passed your air test. You endured it, Savrex corrected. This is different. Soren raised an eyebrow. How different? Without answering, Mirov gestured toward a padded inclined bench. Soren sighed and lay back. A series of probes extended from the ceiling, locking gently onto his temples, chest, and forearms. Mirov activated a display, and a cascade of waveforms lit up. Humans exhibit unusual endocrine responses, Mirov said. Your cortisol levels spike rapidly under stress, yet your decision-making accelerates instead of freezing. We call that panic multitasking, Soren muttered. Your adrenaline surges are inconsistent with most oxygen-breathing bipeds, Savrex added. Increased stress should reduce executive function, yet you become more efficient. Sometimes, Soren said. Other times we throw chairs. Mirov adjusted a dial. We will simulate a minor emergency and observe your response. Simulate how? The lights dimmed. A low-frequency sound began to pulse through the room. The temperature dropped by several degrees. Soren's breath hitched. Is this? The diagnostic column flashed red. A soft alarm sounded, followed by a synthesized voice announcing a hull breach in Sector 7. Soren sat up. Wait, that's a real part of the ship, isn't it? Remain calm, Savrex said. This is a closed-loop simulation. The alarm escalated. A vent in the wall hissed, and a gust of cold air rushed into the room, lifting loose papers and sending a tray of instruments skidding. Soren's heart pounded. He stood, scanned the room, and bolted for the wall panel where the emergency seal should be. What are you doing? Mirav asked, surprised. Trying to stop the breach, Soren said, ripping open the panel and jamming the manual override switch. It is simulated, Savrak said again, louder. I know, Soren said, but it feels real. That's the point, right? The alarm cut abruptly. The lights returned to normal. The temperature stabilized. Mirav folded their arms. He initiated a containment response after only 6 seconds. Do your people not do that? Soren asked, still catching his breath. Our species typically wait for command verification. Soren blinked. If there's a hole in the ship, you wait for permission to plug it? Mirav didn't reply. Savrex looked at the diagnostic readout. His cortisol levels did spike, but he maintained coherent decision pathways. Welcome to anxiety, Soren said. It's not always fun, but it gets things done. 2 hours later, after a nutrient-paced meal that tasted vaguely of burnt orange peels, Soren was called to the diplomatic chamber for final review of the trade agreement. The chamber was elliptical, with seating arranged vertically rather than in a circle. Soren floated awkwardly in a magnetic suspension field, trying not to rotate upside down. Velen, the chief negotiator, addressed the assembly. Earth's application has been processed. The representative has demonstrated biological tolerance, psychological resilience, and cultural flexibility. A murmuring ripple passed through the delegates. Velen turned to Soren. You are permitted to make a closing statement. Soren floated forward slightly, gripping a stabilizer bar. Thanks, he said. Look, I know humans are weird. We sneeze at flowers, store memories in squishy bits, and occasionally sprint into danger with no plan. But we adapt. Not because we're fearless. Because we don't wait to be fearless to act. He paused. We're not the most advanced species out there. But we're very, very hard to stop. Velen's pupils adjusted in a tight spiral. That is consistent with our findings. The chamber fell silent. Then a light flashed above the central console. Earth is accepted into the Wexari trade network, Velen declared. Soren exhaled and gave a thumbs up before remembering that only 3 of the species in the room had fingers. Afterward, as he packed up his things in the quarters that weren't quite quarters, Savrex entered without announcement. You performed beyond expectations. I get that a lot, Soren said, stuffing his data pad into a softshell case. There is interest in further study. Soren laughed. You want to turn me into a research project? No, but we would like to observe more of your kind. Not under duress. In collaborative settings. Trade delegates? Cultural liaisons. Crisis consultants. Possibly culinary ambassadors. Soren paused. You want to try Earth food? We have seen visual records. Your species applies heat to meat in inventive ways. That's called barbecuing. Savrex nodded. It appears to be a communal ritual involving smoke and argument. You nailed it. Soren zipped the case shut. Well, this has been educational. I didn't expect to be allergic, interrogated, and nearly frozen in a single week. You endured, Savrex said. Yep, Soren said, slinging the case over his shoulder. But next time, I'm bringing backup. Preferably someone with better lungs. As he stepped into the docking corridor, the ship's systems played a farewell tone 3 overlapping harmonics that somehow sounded approving. Back on the shuttle bound for the Earth Consulate Station, Soren finally sat still, letting the silence wrap around him. No alarms, no simulations, no glowing fluids. Just the hum of engines and the faint scent of sterilized upholstery. He pulled out a small canister from his pocket and gave it a shake. It rattled softly. Antihistamines. Just in case. No one had called him a hero. No one had thrown a parade. But Earth had a trade agreement. And humanity, in all its sneezing, overthinking, panic-prone glory, was now part of something far bigger. Soren leaned back and closed his eyes. Maybe next spring, the Wexari would visit Earth. He hoped they liked cherry blossoms.